Welcome to episode 8 of Stayin Alive with me, Jesse Smith, a podcast about creative people and how they navigate through the highways of the creative arts industries. Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing very well indeed. After the government announced this week that from July 4th the lockdown will be easing further, our bubbles can get bigger and pubs and restaurants can reopen. To many there may have been a collective sigh of relief that life is gradually getting back to normality. But for us creatives, we are firmly stuck in lockdown. The government did introduce a so-called roadmap for the return of theatre and music, but with no timescale or news of additional funding, many of our beloved venues and theatres are under threat of immediate closure, and many people are at risk of losing their jobs. The Music Venues Trust also published a letter this week to the government calling for support to prevent the closure of hundreds of grassroots music venues, so things are looking pretty bleak. To discuss these important issues facing the arts sector, I was very grateful to be able to chat with Tom Watson, former Deputy Leader of the Labour Party and former Shadow Secretary of State for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport. He also had a major role in the News International phone hacking scandal by bringing events at the News of the World public. Tom retired from politics in November 2019 and is now the chair of UK Music. UK Music are an umbrella-type organisation that represent the music industry by working with the Musicians' Union, Help Musicians, PRS, PPL and many other industry bodies and lobby the government on their behalf with a collective voice. Personally, Tom speaks openly about how he managed to reverse his type 2 diabetes condition through diet and exercise and published a book about it called Downsizing that we discuss in the pod. He was a true gent, and I really hope you enjoy our conversation. My guest for episode 8 of Stayin Alive is Tom Watson. So I'm here with Tom Watson. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this, Tom.
It's a genuine pleasure.
Yeah. Talk to me about how you fell in love with music in the first place.
Okay. Well, I mean, music has always been the backdrop to my life. The good times, the bad times, there's always a song to play. And when I was a kid, I grew up in Kidderminster in the Midlands, not too far from where you're interviewing me now. And it was in the 80s, and I was at the school sort of cohort that would have left at 16 in 1981, and no one was getting jobs, so everyone was buying second-hand guitars and trying to be rock stars. And I was very strongly influenced by music culture then. We wore our Fred Perrys every day. I wore Fred Perrys under my school blazer with a school tie as an act of rebellion. We worshipped the Specials. We considered ourselves the elite of the music world because we were from the West Midlands and we had the Specials. And it had always been with me. I guess the Specials were part of the reason I got into politics. And that got me into sort of anti-racism campaigns around in the 1980s and late 1970s. And there was a lot going on. There was Rock Against Racism and all sorts of bands sort of making political points, really. And then I ended up as a photocopy kid at the Labour Party headquarters in London in 1984. And the then leader of the Labour Party, Neil Kinnock, realised that Labour had not really got an offer to young people. We'd done very badly in recent elections with first-time voters, and so he encouraged people from the music world to try and help us draft an arts and culture policy, and that led to the creation of Red Wedge. And I was the youngest person in the Labour headquarters by about 30 years, so they let me do the photocopying for Red Wedge. And I got to meet people like Billy Bragg, and there were a whole host of people from that era who wanted a change of political scene in London and in the country. And so my kind of political life has always been wrapped up in music life. And then for me, when I ended up being an MP, I was elected in 2001. I always felt I needed to give something back to music, because there were just amazing people who made such sort of, iconic things in my life, that I wanted to make sure we nurtured the next generation of musicians. And that obviously led to me, when I left politics, trying to give something back, as I'm currently the chair of UK Music. And so it's always been part of my life, in the really dark moments when you're under real pressure, music is always the thing that's centered me and brought me back. And I couldn't do without it.
And we seem to be in one of those dark moments at the moment, obviously. We're sort of coming towards the end of it. We were just saying before we started recording that this is the first podcast I've been lucky enough to record in person. They've all been, before this, via Skype or whatever. We're in a garden, socially distancing, of course. But I guess my question is, how was COVID been for you personally? How have you got through it? And
and it's great you say that, because you're literally the first human being outside my family bubble that I've met in over 3 months, right?
Amazing.
So I feel a little bit stir crazy, but it's wonderful that we, even at with about 3 meters apart, we can talk. But I've obviously been listening to a lot of music, and actually, like most people, lockdown has been very up and down for me. I've had good weeks and bad weeks.
Definitely.
In the bad weeks, I've been listening to a lot of blues, a lot of B.B. King. I've been getting a little bit maudlin at some of the sentimental music. There's a lot of John Martin. But then in the good weeks, I've been making playlists and sharing them with my friends and listening to new artists. And, I've been doing a lot of Tim Burgess's Twitter listening parties. I mean, there was 2 wonderful ones. We obviously had Horace from the Specials do the eponymous Specials album, which I literally had 50 mates doing the same thing. We're listening to the album, we're online on social media. And, for 40 minutes... I've only drunk 2 bottles of wine in 3 months, and I drank 1 bottle of wine listening to that Specials album, and I was skinhead moon stomping around the kitchen. And then the other album was when they had Kevin Rowland and the members of Dexys on. So there's a lot more music for much more of the time in my daily life as a result of lockdown. And of course, in the job I'm doing as chair of UK Music, an industry that is really hurting. I've been doing a lot of Zoom course, trying to make sure that we can do everything we can to support the British music industry, which is the jewel in the crown of Britain, in my view. It's a £5 billion commercial music sector. £1 billion of that is live music. They went from £1 billion income a year to 0. And that's a lot of jobs. There's 190,000 people in the UK alone who are sustained by commercial music, and they're really hurting. They are literally trying to, many tens of thousands of music makers and songwriters, creators, who are worrying about how they're going to buy food at the end of the month. So it's been a sort of a very tumultuous 3 months, one where I've felt the collective stress of an industry, but also used music to get me through the pressures that brings.
Yeah, that's the irony of it, isn't it? Because so many people at the moment are reaching out for music, and I guess that kind of online community thing. I mean, I've all my gigs were cancelled immediately,
hard,
so yeah. I've been doing a lot of online streams and things like a lot of people have.
Yeah.
And actually, it's been lovely for me to see the kind of sense of community that's been built from people that have seen me in various different projects over the years that are now sort of getting to know each other online. It's bizarre. But, I mean, how viable do you think things like these drive-in concerts and things will be for...
I think, look, I mean, it shows the unbelievable creativity, originality, and sort of can-do mentality. I mean... the music industry, some people call it like a bit sharp, right? But there are a lot of very ingenious people who are trying to give music fans what they want.
Sure.
And they're trying to get around a lot of problems. I mean, at the end of the day, we need music venues to open, and we need people to take responsible decisions about how they interact with each other. But the drive-throughs they're one part of that, aren't they? But that's not going to sustain the sector.
No.
We need a lot more, and actually there's a kind of the first sort of 3-4 weeks when we went into full lockdown, the focus on the sector, all the bodies that represent the sector, were really trying to identify where there was immediate hardship, and there were 7 or 8 funds set up that tried to make sure that everyone was looked after, even in small ways. So help musicians, great job, Musicians Union, all the different organisations were swinging in. But then the second stage was, how do we help the government do the right thing to make sure that when you move from a sort of risk elimination stage, everyone in lockdown, locked in their living rooms, to a risk mitigation stage where we're slowly lifting the lid on lockdown. How do we bring the sector back online? And there's an amazing amount of work gone on about how you can move people through buildings and all of that. It's very technical. And then the third thing is actually even harder, which is a very honest conversation with the government to say, look, you've obviously got quite a few very influential areas of the creative industries that are always going to require public subsidy, and obviously they've got great access because this is high art, but actually commercial music, for the last half century has been the calling card of politicians around the planet. Everyone is proud of our bands and our music makers.
Of course.
We pay our taxes. We are the people that fund the hospitals and the schools. But we're coming out of lockdown later than everyone else for all the obvious reasons. So you need to help us get to a point where we can recapitalise the sector and get our bands touring again, and get food on plates for people for whom music is a lifestyle, a vocation, part of their life rather than just a sort of profession.
Sure.
And I feel very responsible, and there's not a great amount of power in that negotiated argument with the government, but we are very clear that we can help the government be all it can be. We can return back to profitability in that sort of classic sense. And there's a wider argument that as Britain leaves the EU, we're about to negotiate 35 trade deals around the world. We think UK music can help open doors. We think we can go out there and, our artists can talk to politicians and cultural leaders in all the nations where our music is loved. So it's a big task. It's a big task, but we're doing everything we can.
Absolutely, and the lifeblood of music, and the places, the safe havens that get artists to play for the first time are obviously the smaller venues, the independent venues. What do you think we should be doing to put pressure on the government to get those back open as soon as possible? Because they're really struggling, aren't they?
Yeah, well, we work very closely with the Music Venue Trust, and they've got 600 plus members, and no one venue is the same. But of course, that is the talent pipeline, isn't it? That is where artists learn to do what they do, how they commune with audiences, how they learn their craft, how they learn to perform, how they hone in on their technical skills of instrument playing. And without those venues, the live sector is in very severe difficulty. Because obviously we're also famous for our festivals, and that's so important as well for our artists to break themselves, to get a break. But music venues are 24/7, 12 months of the year, and a good 400 or 500 of them are saying they are facing immediate closure because their revenues are now down to zero. And the furlough scheme helped, and some local authorities are helping with rent, but they are going to need help to get through the next 12 months because obviously when you're booking tours and booking bands, you do need some advance notice to be able to do all that. Even though the venues tell me, the smaller venues say they think they could get artists on stage at 24 hours notice.
Yeah.
But for bigger tours, it takes 3 months to put a tour like that together.
Of course,
There's going to need to be assistance, I think.
I sing for a project called the Classic Rock Show, and we tour 2 months of the year. And at the moment, the producers are saying we think it's in January, February, but it might not be. It's just it all seems to be like that.
And there's enough uncertainty in commercial music to not have it overlaid without political certainty. And we've got good relations with the government, and actually, the team at UK Music, they talk to government departments every day. It's not romantic. It's very detailed stuff about social distancing, cost of this, blah blah blah.
Sure.
But they help with the furlough scheme. They help to identify some of the deficiencies in the furlough scheme that were affecting the sector. And at that level, it's really important that the sector has a voice. But actually, ultimately, we're going to get to a point where the politicians are going to have to decide that they want their national commercial music sector to survive and make some big decisions about how they help us transition back to profitability.
And you touched upon the B word earlier, and I think a lot of my musician friends are really worried about the government's points-based system of immigration, which is going to change touring musicians coming in, and whether that will change us going to be able to tour in the EU.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, ironically, one of the things I'm also trying to do with the team at UK Music, had we not had COVID, the Brexit settlement would have been number one on our agenda.
Sure.
Being able to, do a 20-country tour, as painlessly as possible on bureaucracy and administration is a commercial imperative, because if you're an artist touring and there's a sort of you're going to have to spend 5% of your costs on doing visa applications for 20 different countries, it's just the numbers aren't going to work, and so we're still engaging the government. We're still saying to government, look, this is imperative that when you in the EU negotiations, let our bands tour as friction-free as possible, but also, seize opportunities as well. So we're in bilateral trade talks with the USA. How do we open up the American market for our touring bands and artists? Because it's quite difficult to get. If you've tried to get access, it's quite hard, isn't it? So there are opportunities as a result of Brexit for the industry as well. And we've been very clear with ministers what's required there, and they understand that message. Obviously they're in a negotiation, but we're going to continue to help them in that negotiation and let them, remind them how important it is to a tax-paying sector that is not just helping fund public services, but actually gives us world gravity and status, I think. Yeah.
I've had a lot of really interesting people on this pod so far, and I never thought that I'd be interviewing a deputy leader of the Labour Party, this quickly into my podcasting life. So thanks again. But it also, this pod's called Stayin Alive, and in the most literal sense, you changed your life around and lost over 7 stone in weight in a very short space of time. And I read your book Downsizing, which is brilliant, and I recommend people to go and buy it. I guess, what was the catalyst for you losing all that weight? And you look brilliant, by the way.
That's so kind of you to say. I've actually put a bit of weight on during this last 6 weeks. I've eaten too much cheese and not done enough exercise. But at the weekend, I'm back on track. Right, and the good thing is I feel like it's nothing like I used to be. I was in a funny sort of way, it's an everyman story. Busy, middle-aged guy, steadily puts on weight for 30 years in a moderately high-profile, stressful job, and was in denial about my increasing poor health. And a tiny little voice was saying to me, "You're going to die." And the voice got louder, and I've got 2 young kids who I love dearly, and I didn't want to die early for them. So it was like it became an overwhelming voice where I realised I needed to completely change my lifestyle. and commit to living. And
I think one of the most poignant moments of the book for me actually was when you're reading a story to your daughter, and you're saying you can barely stay awake reading the book. And that for me all broke my heart. And
there were 100 other episodes that didn't get in the book. I always remember my youngest. My daughter is my youngest, and she's Saoirse, and she would always do an impression of me, and she'd put a thumb to her ear and a little finger to her mouth, like, this is my dad and he's always on the phone. And when I began to get healthy, I'm a little bit of an obsessive character, so I read a lot of science and a lot of nutritional science, and really worked my way through a whole new sort of era of nutritional papers. And I committed to a particular nutritional program that at its heart eliminated sugar and reduced complex carbohydrates and processed food. So sort of obvious things. And I got to get well really quickly. And my sleep got better almost within weeks. Whereas before I had type 2 diabetes. I'd get up in the night a couple of times to go to the loo. And the first thing I used to do when I woke up in the morning was scan my body to work out which bit of me ached the most. And after changing my diet, it sounds silly, but within a couple of weeks, I would just get an unbroken sleep. I'd wake up in the morning feeling very calm, quite excited about the day. And so before I started to really lose weight, I got these very powerful cognitive gains that were, very tangible, and that's the sort of transformational thing for me that I don't want to lose. The difficulty is, I've said this before. I was probably triggered about half a dozen times a day for about 20 years in politics. Like, people would just irritate me, and I'd be quite snappy and pugnacious. As soon as I changed my diet and started doing a little bit of moderate exercise, I just became very chilled out, to the point where I think I basically became too chilled out to be any good at politics. and it helped contribute to the decision for me to leave, front line, fairly high profile political life. But I'm not ungrateful for that, and I don't regret it. I feel like I'm in a different stage of life. I always feel like a different person these days, which is a weird thing to say. And it's hard for people to sort of imagine that sort of sense of change, but it's what it is.
And it's a cyclical thing as well, isn't it? The one thing changes, something else improves. And you mentioned you did a lot of research, and that you can tell in your book. You cite so many other books, and the one that I read and actually changed a lot to do in my life was the Matthew Walker Why We Sleep book as well.
Yeah.
Such an incredible book, and you touched upon it, and just how sleep is so important, and that obviously helps your weight loss and everything.
Do you know what? Ironically, sleep. So here's my thing. That, like, very often people talk about the 4 pillars of health, which is nutrition, exercise, well-being, sleep. And what Matthew Walker gave me was actually there's 3 pillars of health: nutrition, exercise, well-being, and they're built on a foundation of sleep, because none of the other 3 are possible unless you get good sleep. And when you realise the science in the last 10 years behind sleep and what it does to our physiology if we don't get good sleep is so dramatic that, had I still been in politics and had Labour been in power, I would have wanted a national sleep strategy for the country. Right? It impacts on, from soundproofing new houses so that people can have, light, dark blinds on their windows in bedrooms to keep out the noise, to an examination of rotational shift patterns. So the idea that you work a day shift one week and a night shift the other week utterly destroys your circadian rhythm and actually makes you unhealthy, to the point where I think we need a national conversation about the hours that people work and how you can regularise sleep. It's such an important part of our lives that people, because you do it every day, people get used to it. But they could have so much more enriched lives with sleep. And for me, I religiously monitor my sleep. I wear a sleep ring. It gives me an approximation of my REM sleep, my deep sleep, my heart rate variability, and my resting heart rate. And I know in the morning when I wake up what kind of day I'm going to have on the basis of the sleep I've had the night before. I feel so much more in touch with my physiology over it. And I think that longer sleep could be the cure to a lot of ailments that people are suffering in the UK right now.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
And
it's not great for the music industry though, which is obviously very often like a lot of people have broken
it's a funny
sleep.
one. The thing about that book as well is that Matthew Walker talks about people sort of genetically being wired to either be early risers or not, and musicians tend to be the late risers.
They do, yeah.
So for me, going to bed at 2 or 3 a.m. is not unhealthy because I just sleep later.
Yeah.
But then people start making noise at 9 a.m. There's a guy at the moment, I think, building an extension right behind my flat, so he's always waking me up at 8 o'clock in the morning. But it's just it's a different lifestyle, isn't it? But I think, if, like you say, if you can try to get 7 to 9 hours sleep, I think it solves a lot of problems, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And so how about your kind of health regimes now? What, are you still on your kind of keto, low-carb diet?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I'm almost totally free of any refined sugar. And I rarely eat, pasta or, white rice or, industrially produced bread. Under lockdown, I've had a little bit more bread, sourdough bread that we've made at home, which is obviously better for you. But even for me, I'm so sort of, I kind of know I'm kind of, those complex carbs, I'm a bit intolerant to that. And it always affects my physiology. But I just love sourdough bread and really good butter. So I kind of cycle in and out a bit now. But I never eat processed food anymore. I mean, I had 20 years where I'd eat microwave meals or, Deliveroo was a godsend to me at one point. I was getting sorry you've left us emails from Pizza Express.
Yeah.
I've not drunk beer or eaten pizza or big bowls of pasta for about 3 years, and I don't think I'll ever go back to it.
Mm-hmm.
Lockdown has allowed me to learn how to grow vegetables, so I'm quite excited because this weekend I tried to turn the garden into an industrial facility to make courgettes, and I got my first 2 courgettes off the plants this weekend, and it's all beginning to happen because I make courgette with a spiralizer as a sort of, so I can make sort of pasta dishes that aren't pasta with courgettes. So I've made some quite profound lifestyle changes that are kind of normal now. And even as I say this, I think there might be people listening to this podcast that think that's a little bit eccentric, but for me it works.
I guess the problem for most musicians is eating on the go, isn't it? And I mean, I'm kind of pescatarian, and I remember coming back from gigs late at night and being starving and getting a chicken and sweet corn sandwich from, that must have been full of sugar and I guess, from a personal level, what do you do when you're on the go to make sure you keep up your healthy diet?
So thankfully for me now, I mean, when there's elections or campaigns on, I mean, I spent a lot of time sleeping on the back seats of cars, like musicians are in.
Yeah.
So in an election, I could be in 3 or 4 constituencies a day, and in a 5-week election, you'd wake up in a Premier Inn and not know what town you're in. You're so battered.
It's very like touring, actually.
and I'd eat burgers and chips on the run. I mean, what I realised was that just made me so ill and so sort of tired that, if I was desperate, there was a point where I would eat, I'd buy 2 chicken sandwiches and just eat the chicken out the middle and leave the bread. These days, thankfully, I've got a little bit more time where I can plan ahead. So if I'm, visiting friends, that would be a great thing to be able to do every day, wouldn't it? Like when we get out of these current times, I'll always make sure I take a sort of salad with me or something like that. So it does require more organisation.
Just prep,
and fridge management. It's very hard. Making sure I haven't got any tempting items anywhere near me, because I still treat myself as a sugar addict. So if you gave me a packet of crisps or a packet of chocolate hobnobs now, if I ate one, there'd be this internal dialogue wanting me to just keep going, where I would literally have to eat everything. So it is a kind of addict's mentality, or a recovering addict's mentality, and it's all about the sugar, and it's a very, very powerful drug. So when I did a lot of research for the book, I realised that in the 50s and 60s, nutritional scientists were trying to, they were literally monitoring brain patterns, and the food production industry, which is a sort of global sector, they've got a thing called the bliss point, where when they're testing new foodstuffs, the right amount of fat, sugar and salt that lights up your brain like a Christmas tree is when they realise they've got a product that they'll be repeat purchasers, and you find yourself getting angry about that. But once you realise that, you realise that you're basically their target market, you could get off it. And so there's whole aisles in supermarkets now that are just, there's nothing on the shelves for me. It's empty nutrients, and I don't even bother going down them anymore, because I know there's nothing I can buy. But the temptation at a very low level is still there, and I still worry that I could end up getting back onto a treadmill of eating really terrible food.
The sugar chapter, I think, was the one that shocked me the most, actually, in your book, and some of the statistics and the way that they kind of systemically get us hooked on this stuff from a young age. It's incredible.
They shouldn't call it nutritional science, really. There's a couple of things I argued in the book. It's a little bit unfair on the scientists in the sector that are funded by the food production industry. They don't deliberately try and make crappy food that makes us ill. But that's the net effect of a sector that has predominantly been industry funded for years. We could talk about the lobbying, which is worse, later. But one of the arguments I gently made, I do think there is a real case now for government to intervene and fund independent nutritional science research, because when the funder has an interest, if the funder is McCain Chips or Coca-Cola, it's very hard for there not to be an influence on objective science. And then when you also flip it, I met a really amazing woman called Marion Nessel, who's an octogenarian, East Coast of America nutritional scientist, who'd actually for a time been surveilled by representatives of Coca-Cola and was mentioned in the WikiLeaks dump in the Hillary Clinton campaign. Such a powerful figure was Marianne. She told the truth about fizzy drinks. And when she came to London, I had the privilege of meeting her, and she sort of estimated that Coca-Cola have spent $100 million lobbying governments around the world to reduce measures, to dilute measures to reduce sugar intake. And still, a full can of ordinary Coca-Cola carries more sugar in it than the government's recommended daily allowance for an adult. And yet kids, very often as kids drink a can of this stuff every day. So, no wonder we've got a third of our kids leaving primary school who are overweight or obese. And we've had huge increases in teenagers getting type 2 diabetes. We are literally poisoning our children with this stuff. And it's so normal for everyone, because it's on the supermarket shelves, that we've not really taken a step back to think about, do we really want to do this? And that's the interesting thing about COVID, isn't it? Especially with Boris Johnson's condition. There's an opportunity now to reset the dial a little bit, to have a national conversation about some big issues, food supply, food production, retail offers, marketing, advertising, health education, what do public, the nutritional plate, the food we put in ourselves, are we giving the right advice to citizens? How do we support people to sort of recalibrate their lives? There's a whole load of opportunities there that I think could really positively change the country with a bit of bold thinking, but not with a great cost to the taxpayer.
Well, the rhetoric definitely is that people are cooking more at home and eating fresh fruit and veg and stuff. I hope so, but we shall see, I suppose. But I guess, what would your advice be for for anyone that is struggling with their weight? I know it's not a one size fits all. And
yeah, I mean, the one thing I'd say is, you know, sadly, in the current climate, you've got to do a bit of joining the dots, because you know, the government give you one size fits all nutritional advice, and I just think for people with type 2 diabetes in particular, which is about 3.5 million people in the UK, the government's advice is wrong on the level of carbohydrates you have. It makes them poorly. So, you know, understand your own condition and do a bit of reading into it. I mean, there are some great science journalists that give you objective advice. I was very, in the early days of my sort of reading, I was greatly influenced by the work of Michael Mosley. And luckily I read one of his books, and I read it on a Kindle, and he does very good footnotes, so he links to the science in every sentence he makes. So I then went and looked at the science papers in a slightly obsessional way. And then I read Dr. Aseem Malhotra, a big cardiologist. He wrote a book about the Mediterranean diet. He called it the Piopi diet. He looked at sort of places around the world where there were supercentenarians who and their lifestyle and what they put in themselves. And so there are places you can go to find a way of changing your lifestyle. But there's a lot of controversy as well. There's these nutrition battles are being fought out over continents. The one thing that pretty much unites nearly everyone, other than the executives of Coca-Cola, is that we have too much refined sugar in our lives. So if you want to make one step early, it's significantly reduce refined sugar. And even doing that will have a huge impact on your well-being.
Well, congratulations. I think it's pretty inspirational what you've done. So do people say that to you? Congratulations.
Yeah, some do. I mean, actually with the book, I wasn't sure about the book because I realised if I didn't want to preach to people, I didn't want to tell them what to do. I've had 30 years of telling people what to do as a politician. So I did two things in the book. It's kind of like two little books, really. I wanted to just explain my own journey, and I needed to show how, shamed I felt really by the end of it, and how my self-esteem had fallen, because I wanted to say to people, you're not on your own. And I know a lot of people say you're lazy and you're slothful, but the system is actually stacked against you. It's very hard to sort of find your way through this. And I went through it, even though I was in a moderately sort of powerful position in life. And then the other bit is, angry at the institutions that are not doing enough about it. And so there are millions of us out there, but there's a massive opportunity. If you look at the research, shows that people who currently have type 2 diabetes, with a slight change in their nutrition and a little bit of increase in just living more active lives, the research shows that at least half of them could go into remission, reverse their condition, get off their meds. That's such a liberating thing. In the life of that individual, what that means is their cognitive functioning improves. They wake up bright. They're less sad. They don't get tired all the time. They don't fall asleep mid-afternoon. They don't go to the toilet twice in the night. Their lives are transformed. It's liberating for them. But there's a national interest as well, because I think we can improve the cognitive firepower of the nation by just getting more millions of people to think sharper in their daily lives, which is good for the economy. And there's a taxpayer interest, because 10% of the NHS budget is spent on treating type 2 diabetes.
Yeah.
We've got surgeons who are amputating about 150 feet and toes a week in relation to type 2 conditions. If you can halve that, think about the benefits to towns and cities up and down the country. It's a massive thing to do, but it's really doable with political leadership and will. There's a lot of vested interests that need challenging, but I think we're at a point in history where, maybe this is the time to do it.
Well, thank you so much, Tom. I'm not going to keep you too much longer. There's one more thing I'm going to ask you to do. I ask everyone who's been on the pod. It's a section I call One Night Only.
That sounds dodgy.
And basically, I don't know if you're a football fan. Are you? You into football?
I watch a bit of football.
Yeah. So basically, you've got a choice of either a five-a-side football team or a super group that you could be in for one night only. So it could be any musician, live or dead, in your group, or it could be any footballers from history in your team. Who would you choose, and which one?
I'd be in a band. You caught me on the hop, but I would. There's people I would have loved to have met. I would have loved to have met B.B. King.
Yeah, absolutely.
The most beautiful voice of the last century and the most troubled musician, I think, of the last century was probably Nina Simone. And I would love to have met Nina Simone, although that would have been a very dangerous thing, because obviously she was a real sort of challenging human being, but quite brilliant. I don't know how B.B. King and Nina Simone got on. And there's a guy I met, his stage name is Fantastic Negrito, and he's a sort of in his early 50s musician from the wrong side of the tracks in Oakland, who I randomly went to see at Dingwalls a couple of years ago, and it was probably one of the best gigs I've ever been to. And he's seen life and learnt life, and he's a wise man, and he's still learning. And he is the best stage performer I've ever seen, and it was one of the best gigs I've ever been to. He went on and won a Grammy. I follow him on Instagram. He's growing vegetables. He's making music in what looks like his garage. So I'd love him there as well. I don't know how he'd get on with Nina and B.B. King as well. And then, of course, I haven't even got into, the entire cast of The Clash. So I'm genuinely building a supergroup there. And if I can persuade Terry Hall and Horace Panter and the rest of the specials on stage, God knows what the music would be. But wouldn't that be an ensemble?
It would be a great gig. What would you do in the band?
I'm hopeless on all musical instruments. I'd probably, if I could play, I'd probably want to play lead guitar. But I couldn't play. I'd have to be like, I'd have to be a roadie.
They're just as necessary.
They're very necessary. Yeah. On football, music's more important. But football's always been, it's been part of my life. I used to, for a brief period as a teenager, work for the Kidderminster Harriers Football Club, which is very dear to me because it's my hometown team. Brief episode in the league, and but the coolest thing about this club is Gil Scott-Heron's dad used to play for them, and Celtic Football Club always claim him as theirs, but he played for the Harriers as well. And I just think, a figure like Gil Scott-Heron to have his dad play for my football team is an amazing thing.
It's amazing. Thank you so much for doing this. I really, really appreciate it.
Thanks, and good luck with the podcast.
Thank you.
So there we have it, another episode over. To me, it's great to know that UK Music have our best interests at heart and will be doing everything they can to help us get back rocking as quickly and safely as possible. Thanks again to Tom Watson. I'd also like to give a special mention and thanks to my great friend, Tom Wilcox. Next week's guest is one of the greatest sidemen in the history of rock and roll. He was longtime guitarist for David Bowie, John Lennon and Yoko Ono, and has also collaborated with the likes of Robert Smith, David Coverdale, Glenn Matlock and Jim Diamond. So make sure you hit subscribe and look forward to my conversation with Earl Slick. You can also find us on Facebook at Stayin Alive Pod, and you can go one step further and head over to Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star review. This was a Jesse Smith production. Music by Neil X, Mark Garfield, and me. If you or your business is interested in sponsoring the show, or if you'd just like to say hi, you can get in touch by emailing stayinalivepod@gmail.com. I'll be doing a very special live stream on my YouTube, Jesse Smith UK, on Friday, so hopefully see you there. But until then, try and stay alive, eh?